Rhys Ifans, Shelter Cymru's first ever campaigns ambassador. Croeso i Abertawe.
Diolch yn fawr, thank you.
Why did you decide to become a campaigns ambassador for Shelter Cymru as
Well,
a chosen charity?
A number of reasons. I'll tell you the whole story now. When I was a teenager, I moved to London and from a very comfortable home in North Wales. I'd never witnessed the sharp end of homelessness, which is, of course, people sleeping on the street, until I got to London. And it really, while I was in a state of homesickness, and was for many years, it really kind of javelined me to see, you know, such levels of very direct experience of homelessness. And that really stayed with me. It kind of scarred my retina a little bit. It was my first taste of the big city. You know, it wasn't Buckingham Palace, it wasn't St Paul's Cathedral, it was people sleeping on the street that really sat with me, and then and did do for many years. And then many years later, 3 years ago now, I was lucky enough to do a one-man show at the National Theatre in London called Protest Song, written by Tim Price, who's a Welsh playwright from Aberdare. And it was a play about a homeless person living on the steps of St Paul's in London during the Occupy movement's encampment outside St Paul's. And of course he initially is kind of outraged that people are sleeping on his lawn, but slowly but surely, and it's based on a real character. He's assimilated into this transient community of activists and given a job in the kitchen, and he's ennobled and becomes, if you like, an upstanding member of society. He has a purpose, he has a job, he has something to offer. And then, you know, as a result of that, he's politically activated as well. And of course, the tragedy of the Occupy movement, although it did, you know, light up the world briefly, the camp moved on, and of course the character I played was left with another kind of destitution, a kind of spiritual one, if you like. Anyway, that's the very long-winded synopsis of the play. During the creating and rehearsing of that play, I had the opportunity of meeting with several people who again were at the sharp end of homelessness, but not just that. I met also with charities such as Shelter in London and Crisis, obviously we deal with the stuff we see on the streets, and realised that very clearly, and kind of it dawned on me stupidly many years later, but that homelessness, of course, isn't a choice.
Absolutely.
No one grows up and says, "Mummy, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be homeless." You know, I knew that, but what I wasn't aware of was how close we all are to a scenario that could leave us destitute and homeless. And that scenario is either losing a job, health issues, or just bad luck, you know. And any one or a mixture of those three things can very quickly leave us in a situation where we are not necessarily on the streets, but where we're looking at a scenario where we are unable to afford, be it rent or a mortgage, and very quickly a series of events occurs where one finds oneself in terrible strife. Thank God for organisations like Shelter who address this issue in the moment, at the moment, before it becomes so serious that they have nothing to retrieve or reclaim. And particularly, and I think the work that with Crisis and every homeless charity do extraordinary, humbling work. But I was just drawn to Shelter because, again, if there are children, which more often than not there are in these awful scenarios, then, you know, as an individual, it's easy to, not easy, but it's easier to fend for oneself through the bureaucracy of being homeless and thereafter. But children, I think it's a fundamental human need and human right that a child feels, if nothing else, that a child has a place where they feel safe. I think any society, even at its most kind of, in its most crippling economic state, has to provide shelter for its children. You know.
How do we change attitudes, Rhys? You were talking earlier about your experience of the homeless guy on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral, how they're in the main ignored by the public.
Yeah.
How do we go about, as a charity, as Shelter Cymru, changing people's perception and attitude towards homelessness?
Well, the homeless guy on the street, you know, it has culturally and historically a kind of otherness and dare I say a kind of romance attached to it that separates the man on the street or sleeping on the street from us. There's this crazy notion that they've chosen to be there, and what I really learned very, very directly is that that isn't the case, and particularly and sadly today, given the limping economy we're living in, that it, you know, that the love thy neighbour thing takes on a whole new connotation, because thy neighbour may very well be in trouble, and thy neighbour may not be thy neighbour for very long, you know, in many cases, and that there's a connectivity. We are all connected. We are all human beings. We are all participants in this society. Whatever our jobs or positions, and for me, you know, to live in a society that seems to intentionally or just by neglect marginalises people who can't afford to live in a home, it's very difficult for me to feel then that we as a society have any right to any moral high ground anywhere in the world when we allow this to happen on our doorsteps.
As you are fully aware, of course, we are here to prevent homelessness at Shelter Cymru. So, you know, how important do you think it is, and what work do we need to do to prevent homelessness, rather than, as you said, you know, when you get to the street homeless stage, it's too late?
Well, it's to, I know, for me, for my participation thus far is one, to learn more about Shelter Cymru's work. I just heard some figures downstairs now in Shelter's control room, I'm calling it, where the phone calls come in.
Shelter Cymru Live?
Yeah, Shelter Cymru, yeah. And you know, there are 350 calls a month from individuals who are having trouble
and facing
homelessness in a very real way.
Exactly.
Some of those phone calls are happening on the day while the bailiffs are knocking on the door.
Yes.
That's 350 calls a week. The reason it's 350 calls a week is because that's the only the amount of calls they're able to take. So there are more. Behind each one of those 350 calls, of course, there's an individual. More often than not, there's a couple. There are two or more adults, and then, of course, after that, the real tragedy, there are, in many of these cases, there are children.
And there'll be 1,100 children in Wales homelessness this Christmas.
I find it very hard to sit still knowing that figure.
So you are becoming our campaign's ambassador.
Yeah.
So we won't let you sit still.
Right.
So when are you going to start campaigning with us?
Well, hopefully, you know, today now making this little interview is a beginning. As we go along, I'm hoping to learn more and arm myself with facts and figures. A question I asked the girls downstairs now and the guys downstairs was, you know, when a family is to be evicted, is there a kind of legal structure in place that protects the children within that family unit? Other than extending or delaying the eviction, there doesn't seem to be, and I think one campaign that I kind of really responded to this way is to maybe this afternoon is to make it impossible for any child to be evicted from what they consider their safe haven in the world. No child has ever forgotten, neglected to, or been unable to pay rent or a mortgage. Children are children, and we should all be looking after them.
Great, well we really look forward to working with you, Rhys, a diolch yn fawr iawn am gytuno I fod yn lys-genad ymgyrchoedd dros dyn ni fan hyn yn Siarad y Cymru. Mae'n bod bleser siarad y ti.
Croeso.
Diolch yn fawr.